With me today is Brian Haymore, Senior IT Architect for HPC at the Center for High Performance Computing at the University of Utah. We have Dhruv Chakravorty, Senior Director, Advanced Systems for Princeton Research Computing, and myself, Manager of Research Infrastructure and Operations for Advanced Research Computing. And we're here to talk to you today about procurement, as it is a battle at the current moment. I'm here at the Upper Bound Conference in Edmonton, Alberta, and procurement is becoming the number one conversation in an AI conference. And you wouldn't think that AI conferences would be so focused on purchasing the hardware, but we're in a bit of a race to build capacity across our institutions and labs. And we're finding that the bottleneck is actually buying stuff, or at least lots of us are. So I'm super excited to unpack today. I have ideas for how I can contribute to the conversation, but I'll stop talking now and I'll pass it over to my colleague Brian, who's going to present some information for us to work off of.
All right. So yeah, this kind of surfaced in a number of ways, just kind of in conversations, and it evolved as we kind of developed the idea of the topic. But as Matt was saying, the procurement process right now is very unusual. Maybe not in the most pleasing of directions, right? So and as I kind of go through this kind of opening a little bit, I'll kind of acknowledge that we're in the middle of kind of a shift in our model of operation, and these two things kind of landing together, feel like we made things feel even worse for us, right? So the key parts here is traditional procurement timelines, getting stable quotes right now. Are not normal. They're taking lots longer. On top of that, how long quotes are valid for is much shorter. We run into a few situations where we are given a 24-hour life cycle of a quote to act on. In other circumstances, where you get a little bit longer, we can find us in the situation where at the point of purchase, the quotes have to be reapproved and option to be refused. There's a number of things that's easy to empathize with the vendors you're working with, where they're struggling to nail down their own answers, and it just seems like a challenging situation to work in, especially when you're looking at larger purchases. And navigating, just the supply chain issues of all of the parts that you need to have, land in together. The extra bit I was mentioning that's a little bit related to our current situation is we've been in a condo model that I'd add the adjectives of an owner condo model, where we would kind of buy as an owner showed up, or a aspiring owner would show up with funds, and we'd order at that point, work with them to make a selection. Into more of a service model where we're pre-buying resources and then selling from that. And, it would negatively affect both of these, but this shift to a service model where you're trying to stay just a little bit out in front of the need, so that as a researcher shows up, that we have resources to sell them service on, that we have it. And at this point, 9+ month lead times. And the chase to get those quotes is making this initial step in this direction overly challenging. So this is kind of the problem area, is looking at how we're each encountering this, in very different, facets, of what we're each doing, not just the three of us here, but all of you as well, and looking to kind of discuss, how we're encountering things. So that I'll pause and see if anybody else on the panel would like to chime in.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about our experience, and one has to be cognizant of all the NDAs and other non-disclosure things which are in place that really complicate this dynamic environment we're seeing. What's happening is and I think most people are already aware of this, but for background, what we are witnessing is the validity of codes. Traditionally, codes used to be issued for 3 months, maybe 6 months if you were in excellent relations. give you an opportunity to explore the hardware, test it out, reach out to faculty, stakeholders, the community, and explore the challenges they might face, plan the deployment in time. And a lot of that has changed today. So quotes are only valid for 7 to 14 days. And even if you are trying to purchase the equipment that was quoted within those days, you may or may not succeed because of supply chain constraints. A lot of the OEMs do not sell a single black box. There are multiple components, and if a component has to be switched out, they might have to go back and recode the entire device. A lot of times, the salespeople themselves may not know what they're up against. So, one of the things we have to note is that they are our ambassadors back to the companies, back to the people managing the financials and the supply chains, and advocating on our behalf. So, one of the things we've been trying to do is empower them to have those conversations at their organizations to ensure that we get the academic discounts, the buy-in, the support from leadership to ensure that the commitments made to us are really seen through. So that's another aspect that's coming. Brian, I'll invite you to chime in.
Yeah, I want to jump off that point in terms of providing support to your salespeople, because I think you made an excellent point there, Drew, that they are your advocate in this large ecosystem where you're competing for memory allocation, for storage components, etc. And we have to give them the tools that they can use to advocate on our behalf and get us moved up that priority line. And what we've done recently is counter to like previously our relationships with vendors were ours in terms of the research computing unit, and it was tech folks, tech practitioners talking to their sales folks. But what we've found has become an additional piece we have to do is involve our larger university administration in these conversations. So we've been arranging for meetings with our university president, VPRs, etc., with some of the large suppliers and their respective executives to build those relationships at that level and work towards like named priority agreements, um, different memorandums of understanding, things that we would never have imagined being necessary. We would have never involved our university leadership at that level in this conversation, but we found that we benefit from that. And you just kind of glued it together for me, is that that's a tool that then the salespeople can use and say, hey, this university, this lab is a named priority for us. Can we please escalate this order and get it in there?
So I'm going to add in, I like what you're saying, and I'm going to take a moment to reference one of my favorite quotes. I latched on to in one of those Incredibles movies where there's the villain is making a comment about being special and set apart, and and once everybody is special, then nobody is special, kind of things. I'm not doing well on it, but I think you get my point. In the end, those relationships are great, but we're all trying to develop those relationships, and we're all still in that same queue of things, and so it creates a challenge, and that kind of sets a stage into kind of one of the next points that we were mulling around, and this is that choice of do we try to act right now and try to get our orders pushed through, or do we strategically choose to wait and hope that circumstances are better if we wait a little bit, prices are better. So I'm kind of curious, amongst any of us on the call, as well as the panel members, what considerations we're giving for uh, pushing forward, kind of independent of the pricing and the availability versus strategically choosing to maybe wait, hoping for something to be more sane. Which of you like to chime in?
Yeah, maybe I'll kick it off. Um, the that question has come up certainly when we were first getting quotes. We're in a bit of a project right now where we're refreshing our foundational infrastructure. So here at the University of British Columbia, we have two infrastructure planes, one being the national system, so through the federal government, similar to what you all have through Access or Exceed. But we provide some support for that ecosystem as well. But we have our own institutionally dedicated equipment, and we're going through the process of refreshing the underlying hardware for a 7-year-old system, about 16,000 cores, 200 GPUs. And when we first started getting quotes, preliminary quotes to go for funding release, that uh, quotation has doubled since we started putting forward for the original funding. And that was the question asked for us from finance is, well, can't we just wait this out? And I think that's where you um, need to put on your statistics hat a little bit and also work with your partners to provide data. Obviously, the vendors are going to provide you data that encourages you to spend now. Um, and your finance folks know that are going to be skeptical of the data that the vendor's giving you. So I think that's where, shameless plug for CARC here is tapping into those community organizations and providing data that's aggregated from other institutions and labs is of benefit. So we provided a combination of vendor data on and as well as community data from different sources, HPC Wire, et cetera. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of at the moment. And showing that the price isn't going to be compressed until 2027 at best. And researchers are also adding heat to this situation as well. Because yes, we're hearing from researchers that they need these resources, but at this point, deans, department heads, and even VPs, especially vice presidents of research, are hearing from their researchers that they need access to this capacity. So I think that's on their side, is that the urgency is there, and if you can quantify it with facts and data, that helps the case. I'm firmly in the let's build the capacity now. While you have the funding available, but I'm also in a situation where I don't have an endless endowment. I have to work really hard to propose, um, to put together a costing model and funding proposition for refreshing any infrastructure here or even building out infrastructure.
So, Matt, thanks for sharing that. So, one of the interesting observations is that while the price for computing has gone up, the checks keep on coming. There has been no pushback. It's not like the housing market where there was a bubble and then, like there was a transition. So the money keeps on coming both from private industry and from the federal side. So there's so far, at least in my experience, I haven't seen a correcting function come in. So the OpenAI Foundry space, when that opened up, it got filled up in less than a week. And so just in time, in terms of sheer timelines, I think um, that could be problematic. On the other hand, on the glass half full side, a lot of times because our orders are much smaller than what the hyperscalers are asking for, the shipment times can be miraculously fast. I can say there have been equipment that we were expecting in October, November. Those were the lead times given to us, and that's already arrived. And so we are seeing that happen, and I think what is helping us is engagement across different parts of these organizations, and once again empowering the sales team and helping them advocate for us. The other aspects that I think people need to start considering as they're ordering equipment is the researcher preparedness, educating them and informing them on how the landscape has changed. To my pleasant surprise, most people have been fairly understanding of this change. they're seeing what's happening, they're aware of it. The numbers sometimes take them by surprise. They take us by surprise too. And I think educating them with data and respecting, where they're coming from and engaging them as partners and collaborators in this process is very impactful. It really helps develop the ROI case for them because, they have to do the work on this. These are grant dollars for which they've gone and competed, and they have some fantastic things they're working on. And then how do we make all of that work? The other aspect I think that has been helpful is right sizing the workload to these machines and identifying and again helping researchers either optimize code so that they can use an alternate architecture. And sometimes they do not necessarily need the shiniest, brightest thing or the latest thing. Not that we can get it anyways, but it makes everyone feel better.
From the audience, if any of you have thoughts on this, we'd encourage you to, drop a comment in the chat or unmute and join on in. While we've got the moment, I'd add in kind of our part. We are definitely in shock here about the prices, and kind of what the plannings that were going on for budgets previously, whether they be in individual researchers' plans of funds they were gathering or our own. And that's definitely having an impact on questions about, is now the time? Will it get worse? And it's easy to see that direction and wonder how long one might have to wait before things potentially reach back to what we might think of as normal. But without any way to crystal ball that out in a meaningful way, it starts having you have conversations about, well, if we just keep moving forward as Matt and Drew have kind of described and purchase and then just work with what you have, with what you can get. I'd make note that we have historically not had a lot of appetite for some of the public cloud offerings, but that starts to become more for us part of the conversation now about the what ifs on that direction. We don't have a lot of meaningful action there, but it's wondering is that become an interim viable path as well. So I don't know. Does anybody from the audience got any quick thoughts on this point, or our panel members any additional comments? All right.
I do have a question if I could jump in real quick.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I have a meeting I've got to run to in a few minutes. I just want to lob this out there. Um, some folks are talking about the secondary market for used hardware as an option. Has anybody seen anything happening on that front that's actually viable? Trustworthy GPUs that you're purchasing from, not eBay, but I don't know. I got a cold call from GPUmart.com and rolled my eyes, but maybe that's all I'm going to be able to buy. Partly because pricing is a nightmare, but also, as has been mentioned already, I'm at a large Midwestern public university. Our procurement process is months, like 6 to 8 months, and quotes that expire even after 4 weeks are no good for us. We can't get the whole thing moving quickly with a like a tier one vendor like HPE or Lenovo or Dell or somebody like that. So anyway, used hardware.
Not for me, at least. We haven't yet stepped that direction.
Yeah, likewise. We haven't ventured into the world of used hardware. We're also being contacted by folks offering us used A100s, etc. But we lean pretty heavily on vendor support contracts to stay lean ourselves. We want our teams to focus on um, responding to researcher demand, not spending so much time maintaining equipment, swapping out parts, etc. We're pretty thin on the hardware side. This isn't to say we don't get our hands dirty and get into the data center and cable things, etc. And even replace heat grease, heat sink grease, etc. We do perform that, but we try to minimize it as much as possible because we are none of us are sitting around twiddling our thumbs. And if we're spending more time replacing hardware, it means we're spending less time helping researchers run more efficient workloads, etc. So that's been our value proposition, but we're also in a position where that is our value. Yeah, I can speak to maybe I'll pass it over to Drew to comment on the used hardware piece before I launch into your second piece around the procurement timelines.
Yeah, Matt, I'd rather focus on the procurement timelines. That's kind of where we are. So, Matthew, one of the things we've been working on is simultaneously working with our finance and procurement officers and working. We've invited them to attend briefings by vendors when they visit. We've invited them to talk with the financials. We worked with them on we are working with them on reshaping agreements with OEMs so that the process can be as smooth as possible. Um, we're taking a lot of steps up front to ensure that when we receive a quote or a proposal, we can act on it immediately. There are a lot of things that one can do, and that is institution specific, state specific, and the color of money that's involved. Um, and so that has we recently bought some equipment which we would not have been in a position to buy had we not been working lockstep with our procurement office. So that is one thing which I highly encourage everyone to do. Go out for lunch with your head procurement person and maybe even buy them the lunch this time instead of asking them. And though he fed me, so that was nice. Uh, a lot of them are excited about AI. A lot of them really want to be part of this process to see supporting HPC and AI as part of their roles at the university. And you might find an unlikely ally there who can help you navigate this process.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too because that's exactly what's been foundational to our success. So we're getting quotes with 15-day expirations on them. We need to move that forward into PO by the end of those 15 days. And we have leveraged our procurement relationships heavily for that. It was a little bit of a fluke, is that we had a push on the team a couple of years ago where we all started taking soft skill professional development. And yeah, I built friendships with our procurement managers and lead buyers through those programs. That was like a year and a half ago. And then as this issue started coming up, I knew exactly who to call and have open conversations about it. And now, even when we're thinking about buying something, I shoot them a quick FYI on Teams or an email, say, hey, this is coming down the pipe. Then they can preempt and build capacity on their teams to process those POs and get the necessary approvals lined up. And we've been able to turn around a quote to a purchase order in about 4 or 5 days because of that coordination, where previously it would take right up to a month. Most often. Additionally, we're lucky here although I'm in Edmonton, Alberta today, I work based out of British Columbia, and we do have a provincial equivalent to a state buying consortium. So we have BC Net, it's a consortium of universities, and they establish procurement contracts that any university for the province can take advantage of. So I would encourage you to look and see if your state or region has that type of purchasing power, because we're able to circumvent our institutional RFP policies and backstop onto the provincial ones. So basically, it's standing RFPs or RFSQs, or request for supplier qualifications. And so now, normally, if there's a purchase over 75,000, I would need to go to bid for that. But now I just need to provide procurement proof that I've sought different prices from vendors, and as long as they are pre-approved as part of the provincial procurement regimen, then I can go forward and buy it through a normal purchase order and not go through the bidding process. There's pros and cons to that. It puts a lot more onus on you to negotiate the best pricing and not rely on the RFP process. So again, I think that falls back to trust and building those relationships and having your procurement teams realize that you have the expertise and that they can trust your expertise to make those purchasing decisions.
So we took a step which is kind of from what the National Science Foundation does, which is put out informal requests for information. And what we did was we reached out to the vendors for the next upcoming purchase and we asked them, what are the technologies you think you can bid on? What do you think you can supply in a meaningful timeline? And what would your projected costs be? Would you like to offer any benchmarking environments? And they were receptive to this. Some of them came back and offered us equipment for free for a year. It still has to arrive, so I don't know if that was just, but they've been receptive to that and that idea of giving them the information and um, it's a pivot from how we've traditionally worked and asking them what can you give us and what would you recommend in these times. These are our big picture goals. This is what we're trying to achieve. And what are your recommendations? And that seems to have worked so far. Again, everything changes in a week, but that's another a thing to consider as you're building these processes. And then, Matt, just an add-on to the RFP process. What's been interesting is we now are following we're following a process where we assume we need an RFP. So we're meeting those goals. So being in a private institution, depending upon the nature of funds that are used, the rules are different. So we do not get the leverage that you have via provincial, federal, and institutional. Ours are more limited. And so we assume it will be an RFP process and we inform vendors it will be an RFP process. Where it helps them is it tells them that this will not be a 14-day purchase. So then they're going back to their organization and placing these orders more as something that'll be 30 days out or 60 days out. So giving them that information way in advance really helps them position themselves for this as well.
So you two have covered some pretty interesting points along there. Maybe some of the thoughts that you guys got me thinking about was how will we've we've not waded into like what specific parts we're most struggling to get other than just the resources that we need, right? Um, some of the notes that we were preparing in advance talked about, whether or not people are finding strategies of aggregating, purchases into larger things, maybe to elevate ourselves from a priority level with the vendor we have a good relationship with. And there's also potentially a strategy of breaking things up into smaller pieces where maybe then you can, backfill into available, resources that the vendors have as a purchase is made. Is anybody made meaningful efforts that direction? The breaking things up into smaller pieces, or at least vocalizing the opportunity to the vendor to fragment something up to streamline.
So we haven't fragmentized or we haven't separated orders per se, but what we have separated is vendors for specific buckets. So we're strategically choosing a different vendor for storage as we are for compute. There's again pros and cons. We decided that the pros for us outweighed the unknown cons of that. Yes, you need to spend a little bit more time on integrating those systems yourself. You can't rely on vendors to troubleshoot when two different vendor-based systems don't communicate together. But we have found that it just simplifies the conversation, and you can focus on, instead of having multiple facets of priority within one vendor, you can focus on storage with one vendor, compute with the other. And even we considered even splitting out networking, but we did find value in working with one vendor for both network and compute in our case.
Yeah, well, like with supply chains, it could get tricky if one part of the system relies on another part being there. You might be just out of luck for a few months while you wait for a small but critical piece to get shipped. So, there are strengths to switching out vendors, in going with different vendors gives you more purchasing power across different ecosystems. Uh, but the risks are both on the supply chain side and just supporting the technology. If and when something breaks that you cannot support in-house, just be prepared for the conversation where they would say, it's not our piece that's malfunctioning, it's someone else's. I think that's not new. That's happened for decades. It's going to continue happening, but I think that's going to be another piece we should be aware of.
Yeah.
I, oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
100%. Yeah, that's a real risk. I just wanted to add that we did perform, again, more than we normally would do, a supply chain analysis of the specific vendors, specifically with storage, because some vendors are manufacturing their own hard drives, for example, and their supply chain goes a little deeper. And yeah, I think understanding how you're going to stand up your equipment, how your architects and engineers prefer to stage in things, um, yeah, it would help address some of those very real issues you pointed out, Drew, with availability.
The part of this that I think we've been experiencing a little bit is within a vendor, right? Not even yet looking across. We had a few orders where the vendor was talking about components of that order were likely to be, the delay point. So we strategized with them and tried to come up with some ways. And, one example, there was an individual system within that quote that was the important one. And so, an easy suggestion is break that one out, make it a separate order, and let them then put some expedite, prioritization on that. And for us, this all seemed okay. It was still farther out than we wanted, but as the reality played out, outside of the control of that vendor, the things that we didn't expedite are here already in the rack and installed, and we're still waiting for the one thing that was expedited because of unexpected, impacts out there. So, essentially, we can do our best, but not necessarily be able to actually achieve some of the controls we'd love to have. I don't know. There's been a few comments I wanted to make sure we were caught up on in the chat.
I have a question for Dory. Dory, how much are you offering to sell your equipment for?
So, I mean, we're not selling anything. We have nothing
Okay.
to sell. And probably if they knew what we actually had, they wouldn't want to buy it. But we're getting a lot of calls and emails from resellers lately.
Has anyone tried to sell to a reseller? I'm just wondering what you can get away with.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing this, so got at least 10 years ago, maybe 15. And at least for our institution, it absolutely depended on what your funding source was to buy the equipment. I mean, you can't just turn around and sell equipment that got funded by NSF or NIH. So it would definitely depend on your institution and potentially the funding source.
Yeah, there's a comment there around brainstorming around working with campus sustainability offices to make hardware reuse or swap programs. And at our university, we have a policy that we have to leverage our hardware reuse platform. So we do have a program at UBC called Reuse It that's encompassing of all university capital, whether it's a desk or a server or a Herman Miller Aeron that an executive is no longer using. They can all be traded up internally So it's in our policy that we have to, when decommissioning any equipment, work with our procurement office to determine if it's viable for resale through the reuse it program. Yeah. In order to sell beyond, like to sell to other universities, like other folks are commenting there that sometimes as larger universities, we have the opportunity to help out the smaller universities with our capacity that we no longer have room or use for. And yeah, I think that's absolutely viable. We haven't done it ourselves. We've seen other institutions yeah, sell like older B100s, 8100s, etc. Actually, not sell them, but gift them. Gifting's much easier than selling from my position.
Some things we've run into along this is in the past within some of the enterprise-like areas of campus where they have purchased servers. There has been at times a path where some hand-me-downs were passed on to us that we could make available to users, and that was a very attractive, enjoyable, beneficial thing. In the moment right now, I think the challenge we'd run into with that is what they would hand us down isn't the right type of equipment for what the current growth of appetite is around. And that makes that challenging. Everybody is very hungry for some of the new capabilities or more of the new capabilities, not just additional of the same old, same old. And then we're running into the issues that of that hand-me-down gear does increase the people burden for the node wrangling aspect of things, and then limited space, power, cooling aspects that I'm sure we all have our own versions of.
So, power and plumbing are probably more supply chain constrained than equipment. I'd be very curious to hear of people's experience, especially with DLC on working with vendors in that space. If someone in the chat or someone here would like to comment on that, I'm curious to hear what their experiences have been like. And I can share some of our experience. I think this is still a work in progress. But we are not only competing with the hyperscalers for GPUs and CPUs, but we are competing for plumbing talent and cooling. And a lot of the vendors working in that space are looking at multi-billion-dollar orders versus a few $1 million. And they're being pulled in every direction. So even getting specs, getting um, everything lined up with them could be a downstream challenge where now you've purchased your computing equipment, you've gone through the procurement, your equipment has arrived, and you're waiting on the plumber.
So let me ad lib in a thought here. There's a lot of press being given to large data center, power, footprints out there, whether it's at the hyperscaler level or otherwise. Is the nature of that, along with everything else, affecting people's choices for purchases at this point? And I'd just lead off with, from our standpoint, it's not affecting a purchase, but it is an element of the conversations of public opinion of some of these things.
Yeah, we took a hybrid approach in our most recent funding ask. We are heavily constrained, to Drew's point, around power and cooling capacity. And unfortunately, yes, it is a bottleneck on our side, and we have the right expertise. Just with the current economic climate, there's a little bit of a hesitancy around investing in that infrastructure on campus and upgrading it. And there's a lot of encouragement to make use of the existing air-cooled capacity when it's available. And then for short-term access, we're being asked to consider like reserved cloud type capacity. So we're at least seeing an acknowledgement that hyperscaler cloud is too expensive for the large-scale workloads that most of our researchers want to perform, which I would agree with that statement. Hopefully that's not too controversial. But reserved cloud offers some value, and that services like Lambda offers, where you're paying per hour for dedicated access, and you can actually secure contracts for 3 or sometimes even 5 years, where you can build out a fair share type system similar to what you would using an on-campus piece, using that reserved cloud piece, where they're basically giving you bare metal access to those resources. You can SSH in and build your own, build your own system. We haven't executed on that yet, but about 25% of our budget was allocated for that type of capacity as a risk mitigation measure. At the executive level, there's a certain hesitancy around going all in on on-prem. So I think, I'd be curious to hear if others are feeling some, or I wouldn't say pressure, but being asked to strongly consider diversifying your investment a little bit.
So, the economic realities are there are groups that might be holding off on funding new purchases, and they want to wait out the bubble and see what happens. And then there are groups for whom GPUs and access to fast computing is absolutely critical. They are competing with others around the world, and they need access to these machines. So it's been interesting where people, and everyone's correct, right? That's the interesting thing, where everyone's right. They're working with a different set of uh, parameters for success, and how do we navigate that path? We have had some conversations about the cloud and using it, but for uh, the largest part, we're still largely on-prem. I think going forward, there's got to be a recognition that the new way of doing things is going to rely heavily on code optimization. And the more you can optimize your code or workflow, the more the less you would have to spend on the hardware directly. I think Jensen Huang also echoed that recently on one of his podcasts, where I think that was one of the I too was surprised to see him champion who I would call it as an RSE, the need for software engineers to go back, optimize code, and really tweak out the performance gains. I think we are in that little period of time where that's happening. The other part is really understanding what your research community needs. There are people who really need the performance, and there are others who need access to the computing. And while they have overlapping priorities, they may not require the same resource. That's where I think regional collaborations across multiple institutions can play a huge role. Traditionally, the bigger the dollar amount, the more visibility you get, the more these companies will come to you. That's always been true. But now, shaping those regional collaborations or collaborations around capabilities and capacity might be a different way of, revisiting that paradigm.
Yeah, I'll share a perspective that, up here in Canada, in terms of building out the raw data center and compute capacity, I don't think um, we really have a chance to compete with what y'all are doing south of the border in terms of that capacity. But I think where we do need to ensure access is the ability to have a playground or a sandbox for that code optimization. Because you need some base level. Yes, you can leverage resources based in the US or even internationally at often better rates than what you can access it or even build your own infrastructure for up here in Canada. But having that sovereign, or even, let's take away the term sovereign, even that dedicated capacity for your researchers where they don't feel like they're being punished if their code isn't running efficiently at the beginning. I think that's sort of the problem we saw with pay to play. We did do a pilot where we had folks consuming like non-fair share based cloud, and it created a lot of tension within the labs where you would have a researcher try a thing, code it the wrong way, have a huge bill, and then kind of be questioned about why they went forward. We saw a whole like kind of adjudication systems being built within labs to get approval to run jobs. That doesn't exist when you have a fair share system. So I think there's still a case for trying to build some capacity for your researchers that is covered at an institutional level. I know it's a slight deviation from our conversation here, but it's a thought that was prompted.
Matt, so I heard conversations that with pricing the way it is, there's going to be a larger and larger push for going to the cloud. But pricing there's also volatile and it's changing. But simultaneously, seeing that having control of your equipment and really on the processes is also largely impactful. I think that counter argument is shaping up now, which is what you're hinting at, where the fair share based environment, the environments where researchers have more active control on the environments, and having the equipment is it definitely has its benefits in how you're shaping things up and planning for the future.
Getting close to time. So to poll our audience here, the other participants on the call, are there points that you want to add into any things we've covered, or a last set of questions to mull over before we wrap up?
I kind of want to jump into what Karen put in the chat. Karen, would you like to elaborate on that? Karen,
Um,
apologies for putting you on the spot like that.
yeah, I'm on the spot. And full disclosure, on behalf of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I am retiring at the end of next week. So I'm here just for fun. And I really feel the pain here. The resources going into our group. And one of the reasons I've retired just shy of 30 years is because I want, the university have my position and the finances behind it, and also the new blood, definitely a new person, a younger person, not to be ageist, but somebody who hasn't actually experienced the history maybe as viscerally as I have, and therefore been shaped by those expectations. And can work with the new way of thinking with AI and how it's going to be integrated into their decision making. But how that whole circle, that whole loop comes together and scales. We're always interested in how that's going to scale, how it's going to be sustainable, how are we going to maintain it. Yeah, and the prices are just ghastly. I mean, I really am shocked too. I appreciate y'all sharing this because I know my manager and others above me, higher pay grades, are pretty well aware of this and have been for a while now. Yeah, and I just feel like it needs a different kind of community building or something, but I don't know yeah, I'm on my way out, and I will try to be less of a part of the public problem after this, as far as um, yeah, advocating for sensible policies in the largest communities that support our efforts.
Thanks, Karen. Karen, I think the run up on CPU prices, like we start with the memory, then it went to CPU. I'm wondering what comes next, what's left in the ecosystem, that will where we will see this happen next.
And sometimes it makes me think that, yeah, some of the old stuff might become new again. I don't know. Maybe I've read too much sci-fi, but I'm like, is this going to become like some cyberpunk thing where we're repurposing old things? Yeah, spinning disks, things that we thought, oh, that's so outdated. That's never going to perform high enough or control, have enough capacity. But we got so much more data at the same time. We got to find a safe place to put it.
I am being asked to quote tape for the first time in decade and a half.
All right. Well, we are at close to the top of the hour. So to be respectful to everybody else's, I'm sure, obligation for their next back-to-back meeting and maybe a need for a little stretching of the legs. I do appreciate everybody's participation today, and Matt and Drew and everybody else helped put this together. So it's been great. Matt, I hand it back over to you.
Thanks so much, and hopefully we see everyone at Book.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thanks so much. It was a pleasure being part of this panel with you both, Drew and Brian. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks everybody for attending.